As the session is titled, What Held, What Shifted, and What's Coming, I think it would be fun to have four members from different parts of the world and to think about, to talk about how they perceive what happened during the last year and what perhaps is their assessment of what might happen over the next year or so, which is always an interesting exercise given the times that we live in. There has been so much of change, so much of flux, so much of shift that uncertainty and flux are the words that are perhaps the most common words used these days to explain what is going on. But clearly we don't know much about what is going on because we always seem to be falling behind the curve. So I think this exercise which we will do is we will have two rounds. One round, I'll ask my panelists to deliberate on what they foresaw as most important shifts over the last year, and one round them talking about what perhaps they foresee coming, because that's another very difficult exercise to do. But then we will open it up to hear from you as well, what you think, where you concur, where you don't, with some of these assessments here. So let me begin by my friend Yose here, and perhaps a reflection on the larger economic trends, geoeconomic trends, what happened, how do you foresee, sitting from one of the most important economies in Southeast Asia, looking at Southeast Asia, looking at the world, looking at the geoeconomic trends, how did you see them evolving, and where do you think Indonesia, how did Indonesia adapt to some of those changes?
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Pant, I think everybody knows that if we look at the media right now, everything is occupied by trade issues. But I believe this is not only, this is just part of the global or more general economic trend, global trend. And we have seen from several years ago that how the geoeconomics and geopolitics basically drive the current trends of global economy. Like for examples, we have seen how technology and competitions becomes geopolitical competitions have becomes overlapped into others, and how this also drive a lot of the economic policy that currently being driven by many major powers, major economic powers, in order to have greater access toward all the critical materials, for example, or the technological access. But in addition to that, we have also seen how there is this shift or realignment of supply chain that might be driven also by the current policy. But all these kind of things basically try to have shaped the current global issues, global dynamics, both at economic issues and political issues, and also increase the tensions between countries. This is basically the one of the most important aspect. How the geopolitical issues that currently shape the economic issues, the economic aspect, and get the feedback loop from the tensions in the economic areas as well. And it's not going, if it is going to be uncontrollable, going without any mitigations, then we have a big risk in the futures on how this might be another disruption, big disruptions that can basically disrupt all aspects of the global livelihood, not only on the economic, not only on the political issue.
So the economic trends, of course, have been very visible, and many of the things that we learned in our classic textbooks no longer apply. We used to think, let's trade with each other and we'll be political friends. Now we are putting the cart before the horse. We are saying we will trade among friends, and we are building blocks in that sense. So in some ways, the conversation on geoeconomics, the conversation on geopolitics is becoming the driver for geoeconomic conversations. And what this is a large part due to how the American establishment has looked at trade and the interaction between politics, geopolitics, and geoeconomics. And this is not simply Mr. Trump. We have seen this. In fact, from his first term, and which President Biden also continued. So, in that sense, when you look at the U.S. today, and when you look the big trends in America, what is it that shifted with Mr. Trump coming to office, and what is it perhaps that will stay across administrations and across the body politic of the U.S.?
Thank you very much, Harshor, for this conversation, for this question. That's a very interesting question. And first of all, as you mentioned, I think one thing that is important to say is that for many, there has been some continuation of the previous administration under the new Trump administration. The changes, though, the list is so long, right? From the withdrawal of the United States from international organizations like the UNESCO, WHO, the Paris Agreements, and so on and so forth, the tariffs that have been imposed on the entire world, the threat of additional tariffs because of some countries' domestic policies. I'm thinking about South Africa, I'm thinking about Brazil, but also threats to neighboring countries like the Caribbean, where I'm from, because of their foreign policy, their coordination, their cooperation with Cuba, for instance. And then we also have to mention the continuing involvement of the U.S. in wars through proxies, whether it's the war in Ukraine, Israel's war against Palestine, the travel bans, the deportation of migrants, both legal and illegal. I mean, the list is so long, and we could continue perhaps until tomorrow, just describing what has changed over the past few months. I think in summary, one thing that is clear is that the new administration says they have this U.S. interest first, and I think there was probably an expectation that the U.S. would withdraw from the U.S. From the world, right? A sort of isolationist policy, but I don't think that that's really what we're seeing. What we're seeing is, in my opinion, a very short-term, narrow-sighted, very aggressive unilateral foreign policy. It's not so much retrenchment. I would say perhaps the U.S. want its cake and eat it too, in a sense that they want to withdraw from the world to some extent while remaining the supremacist power, right? And I think that we're seeing that as well in terms of the containment strategy that is being imposed on pretty much any country that can be a competitor to the United States. The consequence, though, is obviously global South countries, vulnerable countries, developing countries are the primary impacted by these policies economically. I'm thinking about Lesotho, for instance, which is highly dependent on their exports of textile to the United States. They declared the state of emergency following the tariffs, right? So many countries, smaller economies have been, that were highly dependent on economic ties with the United States have been impacted by the tariffs. Let's not forget the impact of the dismantlement of USAID. And although I'm an advocate for the reform of the international system, it's clearly not the way that I was envisioning things. And amidst all of this, at first, when the Trump administration came in, the new administration came in, I thought, okay, perhaps this is going to be an opportunity for the South to come together, to strengthen, to bolster that South-South solidarity. And, we're here in Indonesia, so we have to mention the Bandung spirit and the legacy that we have here. But unfortunately, I don't think that that's what we saw. There are some positive signs, obviously. Some bilateral agreements. We continue to see more and more investments among global South countries. India, for instance, the ties. Currently there are some efforts between the Caribbean and African states to develop ties there as well in terms of connectivity. We spoke about connectivity today. But beyond this, I think that with the way that the Trump administration has simply flipped the table and really just changed the whole game, what we saw is most governments scrambling to find rapid answers to address the immediate impacts of U.S. Foreign policy. And that's not just the global South, it's also U.S. allies as well. And that, I think, in the particular context of global South countries has led to, national interests taking the leads on that South-South solidarity. And the question is whether we will have some sort of leadership, even at the regional level, to see some changes in the coming years. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll touch upon the coming in a bit, and I think this is a good segue to Tanya, who perhaps can reflect upon two things. One, of course, China has been in an interesting place with Mr. Trump coming to office, because China is also negotiating with Mr. Trump like all the other countries, but at the same time, this idea of global South, the South-South cooperation, has also been a big part of Chinese lexicon, diplomatic lexicon. So if you look at the last year, we have seen in the last years, in fact, an expansion of BRICS, where new actors have joined in, BRICS++. And of course, Chinese attempt also to reach out to global South, as Aude was pointing out, which has global South as a unit, of course, has gained greater salience. But at the same time, Mr. Trump's attempts to create rupture amongst the global South actors is also quite visible. So how do you look at the last year or so in terms of the evolution of the global order and China's role therein?
Actually, we know that this year is not very easy year for many developing countries. First, the global economy is slowed down more than expected. According to the data I find on IMF website, that the emerging market and developing economies are projected to grow by only 3.8% in 2025. Down from over 4% in 2024. That means that this year is a tougher year than last year. And also, inflation has been sticky, external financing coordinations remain tight, and climate-related losses, especially in agriculture and infrastructure, have hit many regions, we know. And still, when we look back on 2025, I think the most clearest trend is the steady and, in some ways, accelerated rise of global South cooperation. Well, that means even if the situation is tough, we cooperate more among global South countries. Here, I want to give some examples. First, in Southeast Asia, the China-Laos Railway has now moved over 8 million tons of cargo since its launch. I just visited the China-Laos Railway last week. It is a great infrastructure, and especially this railway, just a continental railway, it catalyzing new multimodal routes that connect Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia through rail, road, ship combinations. And I also see some logistics firms from Singapore and Indonesia are testing the new cold chain services using this corridor. And also, Indonesia has made remarkable progress through its South-South and Triangular Cooperation initiatives. In 2025, it has expanded technical cooperation programs with over 20 African and Pacific island countries. Jakarta also hosted the first Indonesia-Africa Infrastructure Forum this year. Well, this is remarkable, joining over 40 minister-level participants. I also want to give an example of India. India, too, continued to play a more active role in Global South cooperation through the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. Over 10,000 scholarships were granted this year alone. This is very good. And India's partnership with Latin America and African countries in digital public infrastructure and the fintech solutions, especially in digital ID and e-payment platforms are gaining tractions. We also saw important signals in developing finance. The new development bank of the BRICS expanded its lending to over 10 billion US dollars in 2025, with nearly a third of it in local currencies. This actually reflects a broader shift that countries are starting to reduce reliance on US dollar for trade and finance within the Global South. So we now see that Global South countries, they are developing their own economies with more self-sufficient way, and within the grouping between Global South countries, we see more cooperation, more dialogues, and I think this is a very good sign, very good signal in 2025. Thank you.
So, Sean, Global South, of course, is trying to find its own voice and its own agency, and the developing countries are working in a very difficult environment where you have a great power competition growing. Of course, Philippines is a very interesting case where there have been challenges for Philippines at some levels, but also the partnership with the US, unlike many other countries, has grown. How do you reflect upon the challenges that you have faced over the last few years, both in terms of security, sovereignty, and other challenges, whereas your ability to build partnerships has also been quite striking if you compare it to many other countries who are finding it difficult?
Thank you very much for that question. But let me start by saying that if the past 5 years were a stress test for the international order, I think that 2025 has confirmed a historic turning point. Not just a single rupture, but a series of fragmentations. We see it across norms, shifting alliances, for instance, and even global aspirations. What we face now is not just a world in disorder, but a world where it's being recalibrated around new competing centers of gravity. Now, one of the main questions I think that we have to really answer is, can security be reimagined in a fragmented order? Now, we're halfway through 2025, but the global security orders still lies in disrepair. We see institutions like the UN, for instance, and even the WTO, who struggle to convene, let alone resolve issues. We see conflicts around the world, which confirm that the deterrents and even the mediators of the past century no longer hold. So regional alignments are redrawing the map of influence. We see it here, even in our own region. We have China's Global Security Initiative. We have a deepening Russia-Iran axis, and also the recalibrations as well in ASEAN, in our Southeast Asian region, even in the African Union, which all points to a world we're no longer unified by a single common security grammar. What endures? The human cause of conflict. What unravels? Probably the legitimacy of mediation. And our leaders must ask what forms of conflict resolution or prevention are possible when consensus is gone. Can we shift from enforcing peace to facilitating coexistence, even among ideological adversaries? In terms of sovereignty, the question I've been pondering in 2025 is that what does sovereignty means in 2025? So the once shared project of building a rules-based international order, for instance, is hardly viable. Not because sovereignty has disappeared, don't get me wrong, but because to me it has become more contested and more transactional. Sovereignty now is deployed both as a defense, against external interference, and as a weapon, through economic coercion, for instance. The same tools which from previous years used to enforce sanctions, for instance, can violate the very sovereignty they claim to protect. So again, sovereignty is not dissolving. but it is being reasserted under duress.
So, with all this pessimism around us, is there when we look to the next year, are there aspects of optimism, Yose, that we can latch on to and perhaps think of the next few months or next year or so bringing some ray of hope, whether it is the economic space, whether it is geopolitical competition, or whether it is simply the institutions of global governance that we have seen withering away over the last few years? So where do you see optimism, or is there optimism to be had in any way?
Yes, I think everything that we've discussed will stay for a while, for the next year perhaps, or also for the next several years. But the good things, the positive thing is that there are some response that we've seen, although Aude mentions about the global South cooperation did not really work well, but I also have seen that some response have been on the way, not only from the global South, but rather from like-minded countries. Perhaps that's what we need to also look at the moment. Not on because the current problems are not only the problems of global South countries, but also from the other countries in the global North, smaller countries, middle powers, and so we need to have these cooperations, these collaborations together with all those kind of middle powers countries as well. Let me give you examples of what kind of response in these regions. I think, like for example, the ASEAN. ASEAN currently already have the so-called ASEAN Geoeconomic Task Force. They're trying to have a more collective response toward the current global dynamics, especially to a response to the U.S. unilateral policy, trade policy, economic policy, and this task force also try to have a more cohesive actions, more collaborative actions beyond ASEAN. Try to, like for example, having the so-called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, the biggest trade agreement actually in the world, to also becomes not only as trade agreements, but rather as a strategic platform to respond to the current global geopolitical and geoeconomic dynamics. So perhaps that kind of effort, that kind of initiative need to have greater support from the global South countries, as well as from other like-minded countries, the middle powers, those global North countries that also feel uneasy with the current situations, and before we can come up with a more international multilateral order that we need to. I think we need to revitalize, but at the same time, we also need to reform those multilateral order.
So perhaps there is hope there in the churn that is happening. Or you of course reflected on America's role and how that is that is evolving, and it's very. I mean, Mr. Trump is not going anywhere, and his policies are going to be with us for a while, and its impact will also be felt for a while. So when you are looking at the next few years, is it the pushback that Yose referred to? Is that something that you see being the effective instrumentality against what is happening in the US, or is it America's inherent dynamism, its inherent ability to reinvent itself? That's something one can rely on as we reinvent or as we go about reforming several of the things that Yose mentioned.
Very good question. Once again, first of all, I agree with what Yose said. And I think perhaps being in Washington, working there makes you automatically very depressed about the state of the world. But so first of all, I do think my assumption is that some of the policies that we're seeing, even if, let's say, that the Democrats come back to power in 2028, I do believe that some of these policies will remain. Obviously, first of all, because unraveling them will be extremely difficult and will take time, but also because I think that some of them will become a new normal. I'm thinking, for instance, about the decreasing of foreign assistance. We might see, let's say the Democrats come back to power, we might see an increase a little bit, but I don't think that I don't think that we will come back to the levels that we've known before Trump. And frankly, this is also the case in Europe. Before the election of Donald Trump, European countries had already started decreasing their foreign assistance. So I think this is the kind of trends that we will likely see even if the Democrats come back to power. When it comes to relying on the United States' ability to reinvent itself, I am not so sure about that. I am not sure about that at all. I wouldn't rely on this. And I think it's more so the onus will be on countries that are willing to coordinate, to cooperate, to push for change. And in that sense, I think that when I was talking to returning to the Bandung legacy, I think there is also opportunity there to being perhaps bolder in pushing back some of the models that we have inherited from the West, and see how we can actually develop truly alternative models. And to me, that starts with domestic policies. How do we make sure that governments, rely on the knowledge? We have experts in this room, which illustrates that very well. But how to rely on that knowledge? How to rely on populations people movements, civil society organizations, so that they integrate domestically policies that are actually favorable to people, to the environment. Whether it is in terms of critical minerals, and I'm thinking about Indonesia, for instance, whether it is about agricultural policy. For instance, how do we move beyond exporting for the needs of richer countries to actually producing for population's needs? And I think that this is a moment where we need to come back to these fundamental questions. And this is how we're going to be able to truly transform the system, both at the domestic level and then make the link with reform internationally. Because from where I stand in DC, when I advocate for, better representation of Global South voices to push for these kind of reforms, I'm always a bit bitter and frustrated when I see that domestically we actually don't have the policies that follow through. So, what then is my role when I advocate for reform at the international level if domestically we don't do the right thing? So I think that's where I would perhaps put my bet on. But as Tanya has mentioned, there are obviously also many good opportunities, many actions that are currently being done, and that's obviously is an optimistic sign as well.
So Tanya, on that, I think you have been the most optimistic on this panel, which is, I think, also a reminder that not everything is going wrong with the world. There are elements here which are working and which perhaps need to be reactivated. But in terms of looking at the future, and you mentioned South-South cooperation being a hallmark of the year gone by. Do you think that will survive the kind of transactionalism that we are seeing in global politics today? And do you think China will continue to take the global South aspect of its foreign policy dimension as seriously as it is taken? Because there is another dimension of Chinese politics, foreign policy, which is engaging with the Trump administration and getting out with a deal there. So how do you see the most important economy in the world, which is the Chinese economy, balancing these elements?
Well, to my perspective, in the next year, actually the global South will have deepened cooperation because it's essential. And a lot of developing economies find it out in recent 2 years that they cannot depend on another country, a third-party country. They have to depend on themselves. They have to depend on cooperation with countries facing the similar challenges and similar situations in the globe. That is find the common ground. This is what BRICS do, right? So I guess in 2026, we will see more institutionalized progress of the Global South and also BRICS. As BRICS is hosted by Brazil this year, and one of the most important topic is the institutionalization of BRICS. And we have made a lot of progress this year and next year, as BRICS will be hosted by India, and I see India colleagues also have great ambition to promote this progress, and this is great. And I agree to the idea that the cooperation could not be only restricted to Global South countries, but the issue is Global South countries, they have less representation in a lot of global organizations, in a lot of negotiations. That means we have to make ourselves more powerful as a grouping first, then we are on the negotiating table with others, and we can have equal rights in the global economy. So personally, I really appreciate the efforts of Indian government pursuing equal communication with the United States about the tariff negotiation. This is great. This is what we should do as a grouping. For a single country, it is hard because it is hard to stand out in front of a big power, a large economy. But as a grouping, we can have more equal position in a lot of negotiations, no matter it's tariff or peace, security, or other issues. So I personally expect that the grouping should be more united and steady in the next year. And if we have solid achievements in institutionalization of Global South and the BRICS, I think a lot of other achievements will follow up naturally. That means we can see other countries, other superpowers, they will be more polite in a lot of occasions. They will be willing to communicate in a lot of cases, not like this year, a lot of things are pushed on Global South countries, and we only work on solutions. We cannot change a lot of occasions. This is not good. So I expect next year will be better because we will be more organized. Thank you.
Sean, will next year be better for Philippines when you look at your challenges or for the region, both in terms of your ability to navigate the global south, but also global north, because you have excellent ties. You are developing very good relations with a lot of countries on both ends of the spectrum. So how do you navigate? And all the issues that you had raised about security and sovereignty are also tied into something that Philippines is facing at the moment. So do you anticipate a positive shift there?
Looking ahead, there is optimism. So our minimum consensus should be that we don't need identical answers, But I would like to caution that radically divergent ones also could potentially escalate conflicts. So I believe that the task of our global leaders is not to impose order on a disorderly world, but rather to build coherence where possible, accountability where it is needed, and solidarity where it matters most. So whether it's on issues of security, trade, climate, or technology, progress will depend not on uniformity, but on our country's capacity to sustain fragile but also meaningful consensus. So there's optimism in the year ahead.
Wonderful. With that optimism, I open this up for the audience. I have 5 minutes, and if there are questions, comments, observations for our panelists, please. Yes, I think there is one here, and there is one at the back. So there are two.
Thank you so much for interesting conversations. I'm Rizal from Azerbaijan. So my question is to Asian speakers. So now there's a lot of talk about the crisis of globalization, the reversal of globalization, and we see in the very often in the behavior of U.S. government now, that maybe some major Western countries have become less interested in pursuing it. I mean, after all, and since Asia have been mostly among the winners from globalization, so I'm interested. What are the, let's say, steps and the plans that Asian elites, I mean, the key Asian states, take or are planning to take in order to prepare for this possible process? I mean, if, for example, if there is indeed some kind of major decoupling between, say, different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew Mantong from CSIS Indonesia. I have a question more related to the sort of theoretical, philosophical questions about talking about new order. The recent conversation, nowadays conversation we are having when we are talking about the new order, the future, we always talk about order, which is something related to who gets what, who can control what, who earns what, how much we spend, how much we earn, and so on and so forth. And sometimes we forget that when we are talking about world order, at least in the past, it's not only involving the questions of power or money only. We talk about what sort of ideas that is institutionalized at the global level. We talk about, for example, the figure of Keynes back then in 1945, the sort of consequences that he gave to the institutionalization of, for example, Bretton Woods. Now when we are talking about global south or the new order, which kind of ideas that could be appealing as the sort of solutions for the current chaotic situation that we are having with, for example, capitalism or economic cooperation? Specific question for Ms. Darnal. How about the situation in the US with regards to the need of having the new thinking to create a creative solution for this global order? I'm, for example, concerned about the relationship between academia and the government, what happened with Harvard University, and so on and so forth. Is there any chances that we can still hopes that there will be someone like Keynes emerge out of this chaotic situation to offer the new kind of thinking? Which brings me to second question for Ms. Tanya. You mentioned something, I think you identified in your presentation.
Can you wrap it up, please?
Yes,
Yeah.
that there are some tendency that the global south countries seek for self-sufficiency. If these countries seek for self-sufficiency, then what kind of ideas at the global level that could be a solution for this kind of cooperation problem? Thank you.
So I have, I think, enough for 2 minutes that I have, and I can give all of you half a minute each. So I'll start from you, Sean.
Yes. My answer would probably answer the question of the observation of the good gentleman from this table. So I really believe that we must stop seeing power as zero sum, and we should acknowledge that influence can be co-created even among rivals. I believe that innovation, security, prosperity, and even justice must be cultivated in a more in more places, more avenues, and by more actors. So I think that's how the way I should see it in looking ahead.
Tanya?
Okay, I will just quickly answer the question about Global South cooperation. Actually, there is currently no best practice about how we can make it successful. Even the developed countries, they still not figure out how Global South cooperation could be successful. So this is quite new, and so I think it needs a collective effort. We need more about exchange of ideas and exchange of people. So the event like this is very beneficial. People from different countries come together, sit down, have face-to-face interaction, and with more events and efforts like this, I think we can figure a way out. We can know how we can success as Global South countries and as developing and emerging economies. Thank you.
When it comes to the state of the orthodoxy in Washington, perhaps I'll paraphrase Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, 2 years ago at the spring meetings. I believe it was 2 years ago. She said something like, Washington is consumed by a sense of orthodoxy. And I think that's exactly, it describes exactly the state of affairs in Washington. And I think it's probably rooted in that sense of US exceptionalism, which doesn't really create a space to think the world differently, to also think the US differently, to self-reflect on US foreign policy, and to also demonstrate empathy, strategic empathy toward what others think of the United States. And so unfortunately, because of that, I'm a bit pessimistic about the chance that we'll see dramatically different thinking, ideologies, or new theories emerging from Washington. Frankly, if I'm looking for new ideas, I'm not going to the US. I'm not going to the West. I'm going to Rio. I'm going to Cape Town. I'm going to New Delhi. I'm coming here. But I'm not relying on the West to be the source of innovation. And frankly, what we're thinking, I was just thinking about the fact that in DC, so many conversations are still led by so old theories. I mean, I'm sorry about but the realist theory. I mean, all those theories are so old. Like there is just no update of the software. And I think it's deeply needed, but I'm not expecting that it's going to come from Washington.
You have the last word.
Yeah. There is a saying here that I like to quote. With great powers come great responsibility. It's actually from Spider-Man. But what I mean is that many countries already have becomes more developed compared to like 40 or 50 years ago, especially in Asia, like what you said, where you mentioned about the benefits of globalization. But unfortunately, with these great powers, great capacity, they don't really have they don't have kind of feel responsible to have or to provide a greater international public goods that we need at the moment. We currently still rely on the United States to provide all of these things. So I think this is also the time, the momentum for us, for the global South or for other middle powers to provide our greater responsibility towards the developments of the international order and also the development international public goods.
And with that, we conclude this session. But I think the most important point that I got personally from this is that what we need are ideas, and ideas how to change perhaps the status that we are witnessing in the international order. And those ideas cannot always be, we cannot be reliant on the West for most of those ideas. So I think having conversations like this perhaps is one way of ensuring that osmosis happens between different parts of the world, and we do not continue to live in our silos that we often become prisoners of. So thank you very much for joining this conversation. Thank you for joining us in Jakarta Forum. Over to Sunaina.